This is Judaism Unbound, episode 500. 500 weeks of Unbound Judaism. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
I'm Lex Rofberg.
And I'm Miriam Terlinchamp.
And we are here to celebrate our 500th episode of Judaism Unbound.
Woo!
And that means that folks who have been listening since the beginning have had 500 weeks of Unbound Judaism because we have never missed a week of Judaism Unbound. I mean, we've done some interesting things here and there and had a special podcast, but we have always put out a new podcast every week. And that generally has to do with my fears that if we ever missed a week, our audience would all disappear. So
Dan's abandonment, the Judaism Unbound story.
Yeah, so that's actually a good segue into the topic of this conversation, which is really like, where are we? 500 conversations about an unbound approach to Judaism later. Miriam's going to be a little bit of our interviewer today, and we're going to be a little bit more like the guest today. And before we jump into that, I wanted to just have a chance to have our newest feature of Judaism Unbound, the Judaism Unbouncements. That's not really a new feature, but it's a new name. So Lex, are there any Judaism Unbouncements this week?
Dan, of course we have Judaism Unbouncements today. The biggest is that our next run of Judaism Inbound, our Intro to Judaism class, which you can take if you are looking to start your conversion process to Judaism, or if you've been Jewish for quite some time and just want an intro course for whatever reason, or if you're not Jewish and just want to learn about Judaism. Any purpose of Intro to Judaism class, Judaism Inbound is there for you. It's a 12-week course beginning at the end of September. You can register by heading to judaismunbound.com/classes. Financial aid is available to anybody who needs it. And also, we'll give a shout to Elul Unbound, which started a couple weeks ago, but is still going strong. We have our Challah month, our month-long on-ramp initiative into the holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur around the month of Elul, the final month of the Jewish year. That's happening, and we had a wonderful Zoom gathering last week, our first of the month. We've got one tonight as this episode is being released. There will be another one next week. All of that to soak into the spirit of the month, get a little bit introspective, start to forge your game plan for how you want to move forward individually, how you want to push your community forward, how you want to push our world forward, all wonderful Elul tasks. You can learn more by heading to judaismunbound.com/ELUL. And I'll pass it back to you, Dan.
Back in episode 1, we didn't have any Judaism Unbouncements because basically all Judaism Unbound was a podcast. And just to imagine how much more it's become is super exciting, at least to me. So with that, Miriam, I'll turn it over to you to get us going on this celebration of our 500th episode.
Well, it's a huge honor to be here. Longtime listener, I guess several-time interviewer, but the first time to really talk to you about who you are as individuals and how that has shaped the 500 weeks of being here. So my first question to both of you is maybe 11 or 12 years ago, so when this was just a little seed, and maybe before your big crash had happened, and just tell us a little about where this first idea for this podcast came from or the journey that brought you closer to Lex.
Well, my first crash that had happened, I don't know if it was my first crash, but the most relevant crash that happened before this all got started was I had been the Hillel director at the University of Chicago. And for complex reasons, we ended up in a big fight with the Chicago Federation, which it turned out was the parent organization of Hillel in a way that it isn't in most other cities. But it wasn't a separate organization. It was really kind of our parent organization. And the long and the short of it was that I and the entire board of Hillel were fired by the Chicago Federation. But what was interesting at that time was that Lex was a college student, and he was a student representative on the National Hillel board. And he had sort of watched this scene happening from afar. Lex, you could maybe describe a little bit more of what you saw. I don't know that we ever deeply had that conversation, but I remember that Lex called me after all that stuff went down with the Federation and said, I've been on this board and I've felt like you weren't treated well and I've admired what you've been doing and I would like to come work for you. And at that time I said, well, are you graduating? Because I need to staff up right now on my new enterprise, which was kind of an alternative Hillel that we actually ended up running for about 5 years. And Lex said, no, I'm a junior. I still have another year of college. And I said, well, let's see where we are, in a few months or in a year. And at that point, I didn't have a job opening. And Lex ended up going to work for the Institute for Southern Jewish Life for a couple of years. And then we stayed in touch and we had some really awesome conversations. And as that was wrapping up, it had gotten to this stage where I was ready to add on to what we were doing, that it wasn't just an alternative Hillel. It was going to be some kind of institute that was meant to share with the wider world some of the things that I felt that we had learned over the last decade or so on campus in different guises. And I felt that I was going to write a book that was going to share some of those learnings. And the earliest idea was that Lex was going to be some sort of a research assistant, something like that. There was going to be other things going on, but the first thing was writing this book. And at least that's how I remember the earliest experiences. Lex, any revisionist history in my telling?
Seems pretty right. Yeah. I mean, I was in college, I was on the Hillel board, and how I would describe that part of the story, I mean, there was this Hillel International board meeting, and I'm one of a few students in the room. It's mostly substantially older than college students, but I'm one of 3 college students in the room. And there's a stage of the meeting that was kind of like, let's check in on crises at different campuses around the country. And like, oh, there's this one over here at this university in the West Coast. Oh, there's this one over here at some college in the South. Oh, U Chicago. Well, there's this wonderful guy, Dan Liebenson. Everybody in the room was like, Dan Liebenson is awesome. He just recently won our Exemplar of Excellence Award. Dan's too modest to mention that part, but he won a pretty prestigious award for Hillel professionals, nationally or internationally. They were all like, this guy's great. Then it was just, oh, but the Federation in Chicago is kind of doing what they're doing, and we don't have, our hands are tied. And so this is a bummer, next agenda item at the board meeting. And I remember hearing that, and part of that was that you were starting this sort of spin-off, not Hillel version of Hillel, which became JU Chicago. And then you said the rest. I was interested in that piece. I was curious if you were hiring. You weren't at the time. Then it was like a phone tag thing where like when I was able to a year later, you weren't quite. And then we kept in touch, but there was a gap. There was like a long gap of a year plus. And then most stories end up involving my mom. My mom was talking about my weird relationship to Jewish stuff and all my complaints about everything. And this person she was talking to was like, has he met this guy, Dan Liebenson? It seems like they sort of are co-commiserating. I don't remember the precise piece of that conversation. My mom sent me a text. Hey, have you heard of this guy, Dan Liebenson? And I was like, actually, we talked once, like a year ago, but I'm glad you said that. I'll send him another note. And that's when that's like, I sent you another note and we Skyped in like 2014 or whatever. And at that point, I was part of the way through that fellowship in the South at the Institute of Southern Jewish Life. But I was close enough to the end that I was thinking about next steps. And that's where you were like, now this may actually work. And we're starting this thing. We've given it a fake name, the Institute for the Next Jewish Future. We're going to change the name to something. We'll see what happens. But like, you want to do this? I can't really guarantee that it's going to be super stable. I might not be able to employ you for more than like 6 months to a year, but like, want to give it a shot? And my response was, well, do I have to live in Chicago? And I asked that both as somebody who was in a long distance relationship for 2 years with Valerie, my now wife, and for whom saying another year of long distance, it wasn't going to happen, whether I wanted it to or not. And also because I grew up in Milwaukee and like something deep in me would feel very sad if I lived in Chicago as like the younger sibling thing that Milwaukee has with Chicago. And so you were like, not really. Like, you live where you want to live. And honestly, if you're going to Providence because Val has a job in Providence coming up, cool. Like, you can do some things in that neck of the woods. I'll do things in Chicago, and we'll see what happens. And we'll try to see each other every once in a while. We did not see each other offline for, I think, almost the first year that we worked together.
We had never met offline.
Yeah. The first time we met offline, I believe, was in Atlanta when we went to Limud.
I remember it being in Harvard Square.
Maybe you were in Boston for something and I went. I don't know, something like that. But like for a while, we would do the shtick of, well, Dan and I haven't even met offline more than 3 times. And then we had to keep raising the number. And eventually it was 10. And I was like, it's no longer a kitschy, interesting thing. to say we've only met 12 times. So we let that die. But yeah, we met through a series of random emails and phone calls. Felt like there was an alignment in terms of what we were hoping for the Jewish future and some shared complaints that we had. And then it kind of rolled from there.
But I just want to say one thing of a word of love for you, Lex, before Miriam jumps in with another question, because this whole thing started because you heard something that you felt was like a wrong that had been done. And your response was, I want to work for you. You didn't say like, oh, I feel so bad for you, or I really hope we can be friends. You said like, do you have a job for me? And that kind of knows for just saying what's the right thing to do in a situation, like what's right and wrong, that you have such like a strong feeling about that. And I will say that it sometimes makes me crazy, and I'm sure that it probably drives some of our listeners crazy sometimes that you have these strong opinions. But if you didn't have those kinds of strong opinions, Judaism Unbound wouldn't exist. And I just want to offer that appreciation, because it could seem like a small thing, and it was really a year or 2 years before, 3 years before any of this really started. But that was actually a really key moment.
It's actually where I was going to go next, which is to take us a little bit closer to that meet cute. I'd love to hear more about what you saw in one another, what the gifts are that sparked with each other. Why did it work? You're generationally different. You lived in different places. You heard these stories, and I get the part about the ideas, the intellectual connection, but tell me more about why this was the gamble you wanted to take with each other.
So I think to answer that effectively, I have to do a flashback a while before this, which is to me in high school, when I had to like shadow somebody for school. I had to like pick somebody who worked in a field I thought I might want to work in one day, follow them around for a day and write up a thing about it or whatever. And so as a prerequisite to that, I had to meet with people. I had to figure out who my like shidduch was, who I was going to follow. And I was like, you know, I think mostly I want to go into math and I want to be a statistician, but maybe I want to go work for Jewish stuff. So I'll talk to this guy who's the head of the Federation. So I met with him, and he like gave me his spiel about what the Jewish Federation of Milwaukee does. And he mentioned the different agencies in Milwaukee that they work with and all of that. And at the end, he was like, so do any of those sort of call out to you? I can connect you to whichever people, or like you could shadow somebody here at the Federation. And I was like, well, I don't really want to work for any one of those. I'd kind of like to think about how they fit together and what's missing and like that kind of thing. And then he was like, well, you kind of have to pick. Like you have to work for a particular thing. You can work, you could be a synagogue educator. You can work at a JCC. You can work for a Jewish summer camp. You can't just float around between all of them. That's not really a thing that many people do. I kind of was brought down to size, like, oh, I guess I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that thing that feels like it could be cool. So I'll go back to thinking about the math stuff. But then when Dan and I connected, this felt like, oh, this is like the actual dream I had laid out to this Federation guy. Like when I had said, I'd love to think about how the different pieces of Jewish communal life fit together, what's missing. Like, Dan, you felt like you were doing that. It was a chance to really think big. And I don't know that many people outside of like Jewish studies really get to think about sort of what's happening in Jewish life on a grand scale. Everybody's just doing their organization. They're running a synagogue, or they're working for a summer camp, or they're working with kids and they're fundraising. Like this felt like I'm not going to get a chance like this. And so I'm willing to take the gamble on it might dissolve in a year and then I'll have to do something else. From my perspective, you felt like a really smart guy. You felt like an abundantly intelligent person. You had, dabbled in medical school. You had been a law professor. My own dad was a law professor. I felt like there was this like unspoken language that we were able to talk to each other related to my dad being a law professor. And you also had all this experience in Jewish life, and you were skilled in a lot of different respects and had a sophisticated relationship to Jewish practice, but not only a reverence, like a reverence. Like what I think you and I have shared, even as we've disagreed on many things, like what we share is a sense that what it is to be Jewish is not to like Judaism. Like it is an equally Jewish act to decry a Jewish problem as it is to laud a Jewish amazing thing. So you and I were very comfortable in a way that felt unfamiliar to me. Like I had already been part of Jewish life, but like people were not ready to be like the way that we relate to butts and seats and prioritize like people being in the room over actual content. Like that's nonsense. That's drivel. Oh, like everybody wants to talk about God all the time, but most American Jews, that's actually not their core thing. And we're missing the boat. Like there were so many early conversations. I could list like 10 of these. We just had a lot of long Jewish conversations early on. And it wasn't even that we always were aligned. We were largely aligned. We were very much in sync. It was more that like you were having thoughts and contemplating conversations that other people didn't even want to open because they seemed to subconsciously think that if you were to even say that Jewish life has those problems, you'd be endangering the future of Judaism because like, oh, maybe the next generation won't want to participate. That's never been either of our sense. We've always felt like calling out the issues is not necessarily like doing negative work. It's not doing destructive work. It's doing constructive work.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, it's funny, like in retrospect, I feel like that first conversation that we had was almost like the first Judaism Unbound interview ever where the guest popped. An early other one was you, Miriam, where, and I think it happens like, I don't know, 3 to 5 times a year where you have a conversation with somebody and you're like, wow, that was a special conversation. That was a special person. And so I just feel like that conversation, Lex, that early conversation, it was like, I've been in this business for a long time. The truth is, as I think about it, it's the same as being a Hillel director. And I don't know, maybe I don't want to, give away the trade secrets here. But I also think as a Hillel director, I had kind of the same experience, which was that there are a lot of wonderful students, but every year there's 1 or 2 or 3 that pop. And I think that it has something to do with the combination of, like you're talking about, openness, curiosity, right? A desire to really think, an openness, a willingness to think about anything, not being afraid to raise difficult questions. Even when, like, for example, people do things that, like I remember, and I think I've talked about this on the Oral Talmud, that the first time I ever met B'nai Lappi, she also popped. And I had this sense that she was like too religious for me. And and we actually had a great first meeting, and then we weren't in touch for a number of years because in part, I think I had the sense that she was more religious than I was in a way that it wasn't going to work. I mean, that certainly didn't turn out to be right long term, but in any event, I remember with you, like right, you would wear a kippah all the time. And it's not just the religious part. It's like you had this emphatic sense that this was like something important. And, you wanted to signal a certain thing to the world. And it was interesting because I actually have very consciously in my life tried to intentionally not wear a kippah or intentionally not be a rabbi for very similar reasons, that I was trying to signal something to the world. I was just trying to signal a different thing, right? I was trying to signal that you can be a serious, thoughtful, caring Jew without having to have the trappings that people expect such a person to have, like they're religious or they're a rabbi or they wear a kippah. So on the one hand, there can be a sense where you aren't completely on the same page as the person on like substantive matters, but there's something deeper where you are on the same page. And I don't know that you can always like analytically talk that through. I think you could probably get a little closer by talking about it, but I also think it's chemistry. And it's something that you just kind of have a sense like, oh, this was the one or the 1 out of 2 people that I talked to this year that really popped for me. And that's really special. Maybe I wasn't as conscious of it back then, but now, I mean, of all the things that I've learned in my life, especially in my professional life, it's like, take that seriously and don't lose those people. Those are the people that if you're going to change the world, those are the people that you're going to change the world with. And if you don't take that seriously enough, then you probably won't change the world.
So beautiful, Dan. Can you please take us back to those early times and tell us a little bit about the resources you had? You said that you were just going to take this gamble, and if you'll have a job in 6 months, fine. But tell us really what you were working with and then how that evolved into this podcast.
So in a way, the short answer is not much, but The longer answer is that I had gotten an award when I was a Hillel director from a foundation that no longer is in business called the Avichai Foundation. And actually, it was part of their spend down. This was a big idea in philanthropy at that time, was that instead of giving away, and we've talked, for example, with Lila Corwin Berman on the show about things like this, right? But instead of what foundations generally do, which is give away 5% of their money every year in the hopes that you'll invest it and you'll get more than 5% back in returns. And so you're kind of keeping the foundation growing a little bit. That's kind of the mindset. So you spend 5% of that a year. And sometimes foundations, for various reasons, say, instead of that, we're going to spend all of our money over a shorter period of time so that we can have a bigger impact more immediately. And the Avichai Foundation had decided to do that. And among the ways that they decided to do that was to select 5 people a year, give them a large amount of money. I think it was $225,000. And so I was in the second class of that. There were 5 people the year before and then 5 people my year, and then they stopped the program. But for me, that was an incredible gift in all kinds of ways. But among the ways was that when I and our board got fired from Hillel, I had something of a capacity to keep going without having to immediately try to find another job. And that was the money that we initially used to start this thing called JU, which stood for Jewish U. It was like an alternative to Hillel on campus. And in various ways, it became the kind of seed capital that we were able to do something with, including Judaism Unbound, including hiring Lex, essentially. But there wasn't much. By that point, it was mostly running out. And what had happened in parallel was that we decided to wind down the alternate Hillel organization for various reasons, but starting something new, which was this institute that eventually started as the Judaism Unbound podcast. Like, it had no funders, it had no capacity to really raise much money. And plus, dirty little secret, I hate fundraising and I don't think I'm very good at it. And so in a sense, there was really not much, and we were trying to figure out different ways, but it was touch and go in a lot of times. Once we started the podcast, there were a few people that listened to it and got in touch and said, how can we help? And provided some really essential help at that time to kind of keep us going. And eventually, we got to a place where through various donors and also relationships that we had, for example, with the Ashman Family JCC in Palo Alto, which we for many years had as part of our intro. We had some funding from them, which allowed us to keep going, but it was always on quite a shoestring for a while.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, I knew nothing about what we did or did not have. I knew it was, to quote you, not much. I mean, this gets to some things that we did both practically and I think ideologically. And what I mean by that is we were a digital organization, right? Dan was in Chicago, I was in Providence. And at first that was happenstance. And at first we were doing lots of things online, like starting a podcast because we could do them for free or close to free. And we didn't have to rent office space or figure out, any kind of offline logistics that would cost money. And I think that the fact we had so few resources is actually part of what led us to eventually move from like an organization that works digitally because that's practically the only way we can interact. We transformed from that to like, oh, we're a digital Jewish organization. Once you start a podcast and it reaches people, once you start experimenting with programming on your website and it reaches people, and the website, I mean, we were paying and still like we use Squarespace. Like we were using like a very not high-end website hosting space. We did not have any marketing or graphics.
By the way, Lex, you just gave up any hope that we're going to get advertising from Squarespace.
Yeah. Well, Squarespace literally went down today as we're recording this. So they're in the doghouse right now. No, we love Squarespace. They've been integral to a lot of what we do. But like we had very little. I do want to shout out Kirsten. We did have one other person, Kirsten Gindler, who, you asked resources, like human resources or whatever. I hate like distilling human beings to production, but like there were 3 of us. And Kirsten had been part of the JU Chicago stage that we described. And she was also a key part of the like ideation behind what would become Judaism Unbound. And she was, if I remember right, I mean, Dan, you were a podcast listener. Kirsten was a podcast listener. I wasn't. I knew nothing about podcasts at all. I wasn't a listener. I knew the word, because it was in my old iPod. There was like the music, it said like music, and that was a drop down, and then it said podcasts, and that was a drop down. And I was like, what's that? I don't even, but it was a word I had seen. And the two of you were like, oh, we could do a podcast. And I was like, oh, so it's like talking. Great. Like that we can do. I sort of kind of learned how to use a free audio editing software in high school. I can fake that until I make it. And so we can do that. But like a lot of what we did was because we had no money. It was actually not like we wanted to do it was like we couldn't have done offline programming. And then at a certain point, you're like, oh, we've gotten decent at this. And maybe we should play around with actual programming in Zoom. Maybe we should play around with building more forms of community online, all of that. So the lack of resources, it was like neither of us wanted that, but I think it led us to be a particular kind of thing that would find very low expense ways to be creative with Judaism.
Yeah, and I guess I would say about myself that I appreciate that framing a lot, Lex, because it takes something that I feel kind of bad about and have felt kind of bad about and turns it into a virtue, which I appreciate very much, meaning that my lack of fundraising could have made you crazy, but instead you see it as a virtue, as something that put us in a position to be experimental and to figure out how to use what we didn't have and create something, all of which is true, and all of which I also have seen. And it's not that I'm saying that I never thought of those things before, but I appreciate putting it in terms of a necessary thing that probably none of this would have happened had I been better at fundraising, for example.
Yeah, and like it was a context. I wouldn't even say it was a virtue. I would say this is what we were. And so it's like the improv game of like, okay, you have whatever props, you have whatever thing, like make a story now.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like we had what we had, which was we're like, if we're going to do any kind of programming, it's going to be online because we don't have the resources to do anything else. And so like, how can we do that excellently? I think it was like the camp counselor in me that was like, okay, you're in this building tonight. Make a program. Like you're not like, that's where you are. The camp tells you that morning, you're at the swim docks at 4:00 with a bunch of fifth graders. You're going to do a thing. And so from my perspective, we were camp counselors and our assigned room was the digital world. And as it turned out, I think it actually was a good fit for both of us.
Yeah, but I just really want to build on this because I think that there's something that's capturing something really critical, I think, about what we're up to here. Not just creating the Judaism Unbound podcast, but creating a reimagined Judaism, right? Is that I think what's common to us is that we are interested in Judaism. I would call it a calling for me. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like I'm more than interested. I feel like I have actually tried to get away from it and I can't. And so I often tell that as a...
So Judaism's calling you, like it's like a bunch of spam calls that you can't hang up.
Yeah, like Michael Corleone says, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. I tried so hard. I mean, you said, I had dabbled in medical school. I was a law professor. All of that was because I was trying to escape this fate, right? And in that sense, in many ways, it's a Jonah story, right? And I do experience it that way, that, I'm not saying that God is calling me, but somehow Judaism is calling me. Like, I feel like it is something that I can't get away from and don't really want to anymore, right? But there is a sense that this is what I want to work on. What is common to us is that I think we are, like you were saying, we will take whatever you put in front of us and try to turn that into the best thing we can figure out how to make that moves the ball forward. There are a lot of points along the way of the last 10 years where I could imagine that for one reason or another, we would have wanted to quit this. And I think that there's something about staying with something over the long term that is actually part of the juice here. And, I'm not saying this to be self-congratulatory. I'm saying this to sort of try to put a call into the world for the people who want to be that way about Judaism. Because one of the problems with Judaism, and, when I say something is a problem, right, I'm not meaning to blame somebody, but nevertheless, when something becomes professionalized and somebody says, like, this is how I earn my living, then it's probably going to make you somewhat conservative about it because you don't want to shake things up in such a way that it'll shake you out. So therefore, a lot of people who are in this work professionally aren't necessarily going to find themselves in a position where they're going to be so exploratory and so willing to sort of dodge this way and dodge that way. And it's also the case that if the way that I'm trying to approach this end turns out to not be able to pay me very well, and I'm doing this as my profession, I want to be paid well. Everybody does, and it's totally fine to. I think a lot of people would say, so I should find something else because this isn't going the way that I want. And yet there's just something about the decision, even if it's not a conscious decision, to say, I'm in this for a number of decades, maybe my whole life, and I'm going to stay in this thing. It's funny, on a similar note, I was telling my kids the other day about, I forget why we were talking about like social dynamics. And I said, it's funny, like in my experience, particularly at Hillel, that was where I had an experience. The people who just kept coming week after week started to make friends and become part of the community, even if they were kind of not the kind of people that would necessarily develop a group around them in other places. But I noticed that if they just kept coming, they would eventually be accepted into the community. I mean, I think there's just something about tenacity that is significant in this equation.
I think that's perfect. And I want to go into this a little deeper and then we'll move on. I'm really curious about sharing the level of sacrifice that it took to do this work over the last decade. You talk about it very grand and your Nineveh or getting pulled back in and responding to a call. But what are some sacrifices that you've made, both of you, to stay in the work?
I'm finding myself like in my body resistant to the question, which is interesting. I don't think it's a bad question. I think I don't want to talk about the sacrifice of it, which is it is what it is, but I will work to anyway. So look, I'd start from, we haven't missed a week in 500 weeks. It's our Cal Ripken achievement, or my Cal Ripken achievement. And what I mean by that is the baseball player, Cal Ripken, whose famous record, I mean, he was a very good player, but what he's most known for is that he played a crap ton of games consecutively without missing. Just avoided injury. But really, and this is what I'm getting to, it's not that he avoided injury. It's that he probably played through injuries, including maybe some that he shouldn't have. And there have been plenty of those weeks, not the majority, but there have been plenty of weeks where on a Thursday evening, much after I would like to be working, I am putting the final touches on an episode that's going to go up. I'm the one doing the editing that is often sort of the piece that comes closest to when it is released to the world. Like when you value having something exist every Friday morning, I've had plenty of moments where I don't do other things to make that a reality. I don't primarily see that as a sacrifice. But maybe I do. Like, I don't see that as a Western notion of something I am giving up. I do see it as like a biblical sacrifice, or like a korban, and look, everybody wants to say korban. It doesn't mean sacrifice. It means drawing near or coming closer. It also means sacrifice. It means both. There's the word zevach, which is used a lot of the time, which is closer to just like sacrifice, sacrificial offering, and offering. Like I see it as an offering, but I see it as just like in the biblical text. It's not just their conception, and I don't have this conception. I've said as much as anything else on this show that I've said like I'm a vegetarian. I don't dream of the return of the sacrificial system, but like their idea and the reason why they're killing those animals and putting them up is that they're actually in a relationship both directionally with God and they're receiving something back from it. That's not how I understand my theology with like an external creator that I like give things to in exchange for that creator caring for me. That is the understanding of some of the Bible's authors. And I think for me, I was down every once in a while, not every week, to be up 10 o'clock p.m. on Thursday, cutting out and figuring out the final things for the show notes, all of that stuff, because I did feel that mutuality. I did feel like, even from an early stage, we were in real relationship with our listeners. At first, I felt very strongly about not calling them community. The word community is very important, and we shouldn't just throw it around. And at first, we were in relationship with a lot of people individually. and they weren't in relationship with each other. But over the years, we've become much more of a community, and we have forms of gathering with one another and forms of calendar marking and ways that we're there for each other in times of need. Like, that's happened. And so it's made some of the things that we could call sacrifice feel like I've never been like regretful that I do. I've never had one moment where I've been like, I shouldn't have signed myself up for this. I really haven't had that. I've had plenty where I'm like, damn, I wish we were able to be 5 weeks ahead so that I wasn't up on a Thursday doing this, that I wasn't, recording from Milwaukee or from California or from rural Virginia, finding a place with Wi-Fi where I can hop on a recording for an hour and a half and tell my friends I need to peace out. Like, those are things that have happened, and I guess they are sacrifice, but in the layered version of the word.
I mean, I also have had times when I wish that you were 5 weeks ahead. No, I'm just kidding. But not because...
You're not kidding. He's not kidding.
I'm not kidding. But not only because it causes me stress, but just because, like, I want you to have a more relaxed life. And the serious point that I'm making about this is that I think that we have done this because we wanted to. And again, like, right, I'm calling it a calling, and I certainly experience it as a calling. You could also just describe it as a wanting, because again, I don't think that there's an external caller. But by the way, that's revised my understanding of what a calling is, right? I mean, I or what God is, right? I understand those things to be internal and just as serious. So on the one hand, it's weird to talk about sacrifice because, that brings up the idea of regrets for people. And like, I also don't have regrets and don't feel that I would have had it any other way. And yet I'm also conscious of being able to do this out of having privileges, right? Including having a wife that had a normal job who said it was okay for me to do this. And I think initially probably said it was okay for me to do this for a couple of years and then just never revised that. And so a couple of years became more than a couple. And I never had a sense that she was angry about it or demanding of wanting me to make more money, which I could have. Like, I could have made more money in the Jewish community by doing a more standard Jewish job or by going out and being a lawyer. But I wouldn't have been happy doing those things. So to have a spouse who sees that about you and is willing to, I feel like the sacrifices, if any sacrifices were made, they were made by my family. And there's something that makes me want podcast listeners to know that not just this podcast, but every podcast that you listen to, I mean, some of them are really in it for the money, but a lot of them, I think, whether they are sort of nonprofits or just the kind of podcast that I listen to, like analyzing TV shows, they are doing it because they love the subject matter and they want to devote their life to that. Sometimes they figure out a way to make money doing that, either through advertising or through memberships or through other things. Sometimes if it's a nonprofit, they figure out how to raise money. But the truth is that they're creating, I mean, I think all artists are creating primarily for themselves, primarily out of their need, their desperate need to create. And this show, for me, has been a way to keep my thinking going, right? It's been a way for me not to, I don't think my mind works in a way that I would have just kind of stuck with one way of thinking. I would have found some other outlet for thinking in new ways. But what this podcast has given me is a way to always be thinking in new ways about Judaism from one week to the next. And I value that a lot. I hope that translates for people, that it's doing that for them too. At least for me, knowing that somebody has sweated, to give me this beautiful thing that I have makes me want to make sure that work is being tended to and cared for. And I feel like it's easier for me to say this now that I'm a volunteer at Judaism Unbound and that I don't get anything now. And I feel therefore more comfortable. By the way, I've always been a good fundraiser, a relatively good fundraiser for other people. I've never been a good fundraiser for my own things. And so it's a lot easier for me to say now that I really hope that folks will understand that for Judaism Unbound to be what it is, and certainly to be more than it is it really requires the folks who are valuing it to come and say, hey, we want to be part of keeping this going. And a lot of times that has to do with making sure that people are not sacrificing more than they ought to be sacrificing in order to create this.
I so appreciate everything both of you just said. And I'd like to take us to what I imagine when I think about you all was a big highlight moment, which is the moment that you decided that this podcast had had enough interviews and you were ready to write a book, and you launched a Kickstarter campaign and it worked. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like to feel like you put this out into the world and that people heard you and responded and wanted you to build this?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the Kickstarter a little bit, and I think we did a good job promoting it, but it caught on pretty quickly, and we had a few hundred donors. That really was, for me, look, it's great to get the money to go towards the book, but it was a form of validation that people care about what we're doing that was very important. And if I'm thinking about sort of the stages of Judaism Unbound over time and who we were, I think I'd break it down roughly, and then I'd probably critique this in a week. I'm sure I'll think this is wrong. But like 2015 to 2018 or so, I would break down as like stage one. And that was really when we were getting rolling and getting the podcast going, starting to have just kind of a basic existence at all. The second stage was kind of 2018 through maybe 2021, early 2021. And that was a huge growth period that included smack dab in the middle in 2019, that launch of the Kickstarter, where we realized the podcast is part of who we are. It's not the fullness of who we are. And sort of announcing that there was going to be a book, it wasn't just announcing that there was a book. It was kind of creating, the podcast will be featured in book form in a similar way to how, we're going to be building out gatherings that we do that people are going to come to that are not our podcast. In the same way, we're going to have an explosion of additional podcasts eventually. That's like more stage three. But like 2018 to 2021, with COVID and with Jewish Live, when we were doing all of these weekly Zoom programs and people were all, oh my gosh, they're coming. They know who we are and they want to be here. I think the Kickstarter was the most stark example of that, because it was like, wow, multiple hundred people actually want to put even $18, and many of them much more than that, towards an instantiation of this body of conversations, which is really, really cool. And it led us to sort of the latter stage three, where we've really, and this included most prominently hiring an executive director, Miriam Turlinchamp. Dan was serving as our executive director, but I think it was a different kind of executive director earlier on when we were a smaller organization, where at that point we really had established that we're not just the podcast, that we are a digital Jewish organization with lots of arms and lots of ways and modalities of experience, and synchronous programs that you gather for, and books that you can read, and podcasts that you can listen to, classes you can take. Like, all of a sudden that, like, I looked around and it's like, oh yeah, we're an organization that does that. And we have been for multiple years. It's like, I still don't really understand how that's become the case.
I really think that must have been the moment when you realized it wasn't just the two of you and then Katie and just sort of this small team, but that the listeners were part of this movement of what you saw, that promised land or wilderness, fellow sojourners, other people that popped. And that gave birth to the Onion Yeshiva with dozens of classes, a certificate program, new curricula. I mean, I remember Dan texting me during his reimagining of the graphics and trying to imagine sort of what is the picture of who we are. And I'm curious about all 9 of the different people who support Judaism Unbound on our staff team, to ask them, when people ask you, what do you do for a living? How do you describe what you do? And sometimes I say we're a think tank, and sometimes I say we're a nonprofit, and sometimes I say we're a place of learning. And sometimes, I think about all the different ways we're a community of belonging, that all of that must have started in this moment when you realized what you had built, the two of you, was actually all of us. And I know that in this moment, we imagine how long it has taken to get to this book, but it's because you were building something really, really big. So it's brought us to this very moment, this very week, where we've released this book, and not just a book, of course, that also there's a companion guide for people to study with one another and to lead on their own, and learning support for that, and all kinds of community engagement with it. And it feels like yet another launch moment. So I just want to thank you two for the long road that it took to get to this moment, the hardships that you encountered. Thank especially to Val and Beth for supporting you in this journey and your families. And so I want to then switch now to how the J universe changed also organizationally, and at what point that happened and how did it happen. So I'd like to start about how the three of us came together and how we built a connection.
Yeah, well, it started because we had you on the show, and we had a series that we were doing with Moishe House at that time was doing something called the Open Door Project, and they suggested a few people that were doing that were doing interesting work. And then Klal was doing a project called Glean, and Elon Babchuk suggested a few people that were doing particularly great work through that. And we knew nothing about you except that Elon had said you were great and you were doing great work at the synagogue with videos. And we'd, I think, seen the videos that you had made. But I just remember the moment where we had you on the podcast, and sometimes Lex and I text each other during the podcast recording. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I remember what Lex said. I said something along the lines of, I wish every rabbi would be like this. And Lex wrote back, she should be the chief rabbi of America. I mean, I remember that so distinctly because I was like, yeah.
I'll take that. Now, am I the chief rabbi of the Unbounders?
Yeah, let's
My
hear it from
side?
your side.
Oh,
Let's
my
hear it,
side is much more awkward. I was in the middle of, well, I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was a solo rabbi at the time of a mid-sized congregation. And my passion was finding out ways to tell the story of Jewish life in ways that brought meaning to people. And the medium that I was using at the time were making these ridiculously silly videos that really spoke to a very certain kind of humor, which turns out to be unbounder humor, but I didn't know that at the time. And I remember being on the interview and feeling a little nervous. And then I remember shortly afterwards, Dan, maybe you didn't say it quite this way, but the way I heard it was want to be friends. But it happened through art for me and you, where we would exchange back like graphic ideas. I don't really know why. I don't know if you remember it that way, Dan, but what started there was a conversation and friendship through art and imagining things. And I felt always very alive every time I spoke with you. And I started becoming an avid fan of the podcast. And I incorporated all kinds of ideas and tried to change the congregation through those ideas. And I was like, what if we did this? Or what if we did that? And a lot of them were coming from the two of you and the thoughts you were putting out in the world. And often when we dismiss legacy institutions, I think about, the Miriam from yesteryear, past Miriam, listening to you and finding hope that there were people like me who thought about the world like me, but maybe weren't ready to eschew the trappings, the golden handcuffs of organizational life that we thought we could change or make a difference in. And then my own passion around seekers and inter-Judaism and conversion students and people trying to discover Judaism for the first time led me back to Dan. I think, Dan, you and I worked on a curriculum for 2 years, for a long time. I think it was an excuse to connect. Is that how you remember it? As a chavruta like that?
I mean, I really wanted to do a conversion course, but actually, I remember saying to you, hey, I really think that we should do conversion classes through Judaism Unbound. I think we have a particular way of doing it, and I think that a lot of people are being turned away actively or passively, and there could be a whole different way of doing it. And you said to me something that you knew from being an actual on the ground community leader, in your case, a rabbi, that, hey, Dan, it's not as simple as taking a class and converting to Judaism. People also need support, and they need to have somebody to talk to and ask their questions of. And I, being the completely strapped nonprofit, startup runner, I was like, oh yeah, we do not have the capacity to do that. We don't have the bandwidth to do that. So I guess we shouldn't do conversion. But
you're very convincing.
Yeah, but somehow that idea stuck. I think that what it was, right, was that you started to hear from people who just weren't finding another way. And I feel like at some point you said, we have to do this. And it's sort of a theme in what we're talking about. It's a sense of doing these things because we feel a calling, but in this case, it's not a calling from God or even from the inside. It's a calling from people. It's people literally calling and saying, I want this, I need this. And this question of who am I to deny it to somebody? There was something in our having those conversations where it was like, you experience it that way too. And again, there's something where you kind of find your band of fellow travelers, at least if you're in this arm of the business, by looking for those other people who feel compelled by that. I guess you could call it servant leadership.
You were not only a fellow traveler, that's a really important part of it. We felt immediately this like kinship. I didn't send you the text of let's be friends, but I think I thought it in my head when we interviewed you. You were a fellow traveler, but the fact that you had pulled off these incredible videos, the fact that you were different from us. Like we were just audio, right? Like you were creating these very polished videos. We were not polished. I think we do a good job, but we weren't like mega produced. We were using free audio editing software and creating a good podcast that was not about being super polished. You were complementary to us in a lot of ways and still are. Like, and even the ways you bring your background as an artist. I mean, Dan and I, and you remind us all the time, Miriam, that we're artists too. And most artists I talk to, they love talking about how everybody's an artist. You're also like a trained artist. You see the world through that in a way that I see the world through like math. People have prisms that they see the world through, and mine isn't visual art in the same way that yours is. And it's such a powerful gift to our organization, and I think to the Jewish world that you bring that. Even, I mean, talk about the book. Yes, we're doing the companion guide because we're Judaism Unbound and we do all sorts of wackiness because we can't do anything standard. And also, you're an artist who wanted to bring to life this companion guide that is beautiful and visual and allows people to not just have a book on their bookshelf that they read, but that they are a participant in. And that's you. I mean, like Dan and I didn't have that vision. It's not that we've never been opposed to it, but we didn't think to do that, even as we've had folks on the podcast who do creative supplements to their books in various ways. And we should give a shout to other members of our team. I mean, Katie Kastner has been a huge part of our work for the last 5 years. And they graphically talk about somebody bringing something we weren't. Like, I was making they weren't jokes. Like, I was making graphics that were a joke for our Elul Unbound initiatives. And I was doing what I could. And like, that's been a thrill to see. And Miriam, I really want to shout that yes, you were a fellow traveler, but it's also that I think we sensed you were part of our team. You were part of our Unbounder Juniverse, or J Universe, but you were like a different niche in the ecosystem that we very much needed.
Well, I so appreciate that. I was thinking about the day that Dan talked to me about this position and where he was going and who would sort of take this next step with him. And I thought, oh, half the money, no benefits, no security, I'll take it. And it was because of the call. And I do believe that the divine is part of it for me. I've been able to reimagine my rabbinate 15 years out now and feel like I've had several of them. And that it's not about a job, it's about where you're heading and where you're bringing your people and who you're serving and who is serving you. And I thought deeply about the team that I would have here at Judaism Unbound. And you, Lex, doing Torah for this moment with you and then Shabbat Unbound has helped me grow in all kinds of ways and see a part of Judaism I couldn't see. And there's this flourishing that happens, I think, when different parts of your spirit, your mind gets activated by the chavrutot that happen in your lives. And I like to think of us as a little bit of a trinity, or I don't know, does Moses, Aaron, and Miriam count as that? I feel very close to the prophetess in this way of that my job is to find the wells. Like my job is
That's perfect because they also bitch at each other, which we do.
We do bitch all the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I also think that we all kind of communicate the same way, which is slightly aggressively loving. But yeah, I actually do think a shared communication style and a shared sense of vision and unwavering mission helps sort of deliver where we are now.
So I really, really agree. I love the Trinity thing. In general, I like using language that people think of as outside of Judaism to talk about Jewish things. A three-man weave is the basketball term. Like we have a three-part harmony.
We're a challah.
Oh, a challah. Yeah, a challah that we're braiding. That is all true. And I also want to give us a chance as we close to just live in the now. This is an episode where we've been living in the past, just like our Rebbe from Big Lebowski would say. Of course we're living in the past. 3,000 years of tradition from Moses to Sandy Koufax. Also quoting Libby Lynn Kinsky, who said that on our podcast. But we should live in the now. And so I kind of want to pose to both of you, and because I do the outros, I'll kind of answer this as I close. What are you most excited about right now? I mean, we've built up these 9.5, almost 10 years of collective Judaism Unbound experience. What is getting you most revved up right now?
Well, one perspective that I feel like I'm bringing to the right now is, it's our 500th episode, but it's like 2.5 years since I left the day-to-day management role of Judaism Unbound and kind of turned that role over to Miriam. And I feel like, in a sense, one of the things that I've been trying to do subconsciously in today's conversation is tease out some of the qualities that I think make up the people that we think can do this or should do this or hopefully are called to do this Unbound Judaism. And it's actually making me think about how, we just recently released or started releasing the Oral Talmud as a podcast. And one of the episodes that I just recorded the intro for and was reminded that we did this episode, it's like this passage in the Talmud that talks about the character traits of the people who can be on the Sanhedrin, which was kind of the main decision-making body of Judaism in those days, or was imagined to be. And by the way, one of the characteristics is that they are able to declare something pure that the Torah says is impure, using the Torah's own logic to do so. And that feels pretty unbound to me. But the thing that's making me think about is that there's a point where an organization or an approach or, dare I say, a movement shifts from being the thing that its founders create to the thing that its community creates. And without necessarily consciously doing it, I actually feel quite proud of how we've been doing it. But a lot of it is the Yeshiva. I mean, it's striking me that, Lex, you told me recently that we're coming on 100 classes that we've offered in the Yeshiva, but there's now the certificate program, which I love how some of the first graduates are describing it as it certifies me in nothing of any value externally, but I'm still excited to be certified.
Lisa said that.
Yeah, it's great, right? But it's saying, like, actually, it will be something significant down the road as more and more people have it and make something out of it, right? That's exactly the kind of thing, which is, right, it's not some bunch of elitists saying, hey, we're now conferring on you some kind of status. It's saying, hey, we have no idea what a value this is, but make it valuable. And I think these people are making it valuable. I mean, some of the final projects that they've been sharing have been amazing, and they're going to be more and more. I guess what I'm saying is that when we were talking earlier, there were a few times in our conversation where I heard us almost unconsciously sending a message out to the people listening saying, if this describes you, if what we're saying right now describes you, come do this with us. Like, let's have everybody come and join. Like, this could be a really powerful, large group of people doing something really important, and that, and what the important thing is what we called this, and this was not me, this was one of our board members, Ed Hamburg, who used the terminology of like a disaffected optimist or a dissatisfied optimist, and saying, like, if that's you, if you're somebody who, like you were saying at the beginning, Lex, somebody who likes Judaism, who feels drawn by it, perhaps even called by it, but also doesn't really like it, this is that there's something that you can do about it. And there's something that you can do, right? If you're the kind of person who is tenacious and doesn't give up, and you're the kind of person who can take whatever pile of stuff is in front of them and make something out of it, this is a calling for you to really step up and say, I'm not a listener anymore. I'm not a consumer of this. I am a producer of this. And I kind of feel like 500 weeks later, we're in a position where we've actually shared a lot of the responsibility for making this into something with a lot more people, some of whom work directly for the organization now, but the majority of whom never should. And I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of saying, okay, now what does that look like? How is it organized? What are the chains of communication? What are the newsletters? What are the journals? We don't have all of that yet. And unless our, major funder comes in and says, we're going to give you all the money so that you can do that professionally, the way we're going to do it, if we do it, is unprofessionally. Which can be, you can have that as a double entendre, right? It'll be both not done by professionals and not done that well, but it'll still be done. It'll still be done powerfully, and I'm excited for that day, and I think it's already begun.
Preach, Dan. Yeah, wow. For me, I think I'll start with the personal, which is that I hit 2 years at Cheshvan. So the first of Cheshvan is my second year, and I feel like we're at this place where we are closing a chapter in Judaism Unbound. We are honoring what we said we would do in the world. And now we get to continue with the spirit of it, which is experimentation. And Dan, when you're talking about the people who are coming towards us, I think beyond a love of Judaism or passion for engaging with it is also a confidence or a comfort with uncertainty. We don't know. We don't know. We're not promising that we know anything, except that we're going to try and persevere in that trying. I'm really excited about what Judaism Unbound will look like in neighborhoods, in small community centers and coffee shops. I'm really interested in an embodied Judaism Unbound, where we take this very cerebral understanding of Judaism and this sort of global think tank that you two have built and put it into practice in ways. And I think that the overall goal of this organization has been to empower folks with the agency and tools to go out and do the Judaism they want to see in this world, which I suppose is just another way of saying what you said, Dan. I see more books and more podcasts. I love the expansion of podcasts. That's my baby. And seeing all their voices coming forward and telling different versions of the story of the journey that we're on. And then seeing our school or our unschool, seeing the Anya Yeshiva flourish, both with Lex's genius underneath it and then Rina Yehuda Newman's careful hands guiding us. I see this team expanding in all kinds of ways, and bringing just this next stage of Judaism Bound into the world just feels incredibly joyful, full of possibility in a world that feels like it's dismantling. And to know that there's a place of hope for that gives me hope in all kinds of ways.
Ooh, I am very inspired by both of your visions and excitements. Look, I have things exciting me too. Before we totally wrap, I just want to take a second and really thank a number of people who have been part of our professional team over the years. Some of them in multiple different ways at different points, but Rina Yehuda Newman, who has come up a couple times and has been spearheading our certificate program that is now hecturing, making official its first graduates. Todd Brecker, who's been our director of operations for a number of years now, and who, like many of our folks, began just as an interested listener and as a cold email, not unlike mine to Dan. Emma Newberry, our program associate, who is a new arrival to the team and has been doing sensationally in the first few months of her time working with us. Katie Kasner, who for 5 years, beginning in the thick of 2020, has brought a lot of our head-centered, mind-centered, thinking-centered, word-centered ideas into visual form. Also, as Miriam, you alluded to, the people who have made our expanded family of podcasts a possibility. And I like the word family there. I want them to be siblings with each other and hang out at each other's family reunions. There is a synergy among these podcasts. And Joey Taylor and Olivia Devora Tucker have been two of the really pivotal members of our team on that front. There are so many others that we could name directly and probably should. But I'd add to this list all of our new Voices fellows over the years that we had, including, funny enough, Rina Yehuda Newman was our first, and now they're part of our staff team. And also our other yearly New Voices fellows that did incredible work for us over the years. Our partner organizations, our guests, obviously, certainly also those who have, actively collaborated to create programming together and our listeners. We say it at the end of every episode, but this doesn't exist. There is no we, there is no Judaism Unbound, there is no anything without y'all. We have been thoroughly transformed as an organization by the emails you send, by your participation in our classes, by your creations in the world that you've sent to us and let us know about that have either drawn on our work directly or not, but that you just see as being in conversation with us. We are lucky to be in conversation with all of you and to grow on our end through what you bring to the world. Our board members, our supporters over the years, our donors, whether it's somebody who made, in some cases, a $5 one-time gift when they could spare it, to people who have given us 5- and 6-figure donations over the years. Like wherever people are on that, we're grateful. This is, as Miriam said, a key turning point in our organization, and we're thrilled to have inhabited the previous pages that we're now turning to the next page with all of you. And so we'll see what the next chapter is in the page turn that is our literal book and our figurative books. But we're going to close this episode out in the same way we always do. I guess I didn't say what I'm most excited about, but what I'm revved up about is turning that page with all of you. That's what I'd say. And with a gloss of our certificate program and the fruits that it will yield in the world. I think of us, these first few years, it's kind of like when you plant a tree, you don't have fruit for the first few years. And then eventually the fruit arrives. The first certificate program students started just over 2 years ago. And so the fruit's coming to be now. And what's amazing is the fruit's only going to be more and more bountiful as like the rate of graduations is going to rapidly increase because we have many people who are soon to graduate. But when they do, they sign their own certificates. Like this is a literal statement now. When we made the certificate, when Rini Yehuda specifically, when they made it, I sign it as facilitator of the Yeshiva. Rini Yehuda signs it as the director of the certificate program. Miriam signs it as our executive director. And then there's another blank where each student themselves signs on and in effect certifies themselves. This is not some external certification where we, the authorized Jews, are granting something to others. This is something where, yes, Miriam and I and Rini Yehuda sign our names, but ultimately that fourth signature where they themselves are signing on and saying, I really am opting into this, not because others have said I can, but because I say I can. That's the permission that we want to plant in everyone and have grow into fruit. So wherever you are on that, whatever roles you've held with us, whether a donor, whether a guest, whether a partner org, whether a staff member, whether a first-time listener today that tuned in at a very awkward time because we immediately launched you into the past, we hope that this next stage is going to be beautiful for you as well. So thank you so much for listening. Be in touch, as always, via dan@judaismunbound.com, lex@judaismunbound.com, or miriam@judaismunbound.com. You can also use hello, HELLO, @judaismunbound.com and hit many members of our staff team. Thank you to all of you, and we can't wait for what's next. So with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.
When I podcast, well, I know I'm gonna be the one who podcasts next to you. When I listen, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the one who listens in with you. If I babble, well, I know I'm gonna be the one who babbles next to you. And if I drone on, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the one who's droning on to you. But I would talk 500 times, and I would talk 500 more, to be the one who talked 1,000 times to fall down at your door. Da da da, da da da, da 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 da.